Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 111th Landon Lecture on Public Issues. The Landon Lectures at Kansas State University were established in 1966 by the late Governor Alfred M. Landon in order to bring prominent political figures, cabinet members, journalists, economists, and other public leaders to Kansas State to discuss the most pressing issues of the day. We are very pleased to have U.S. Senator Phil Gramm with us today to follow in that very long and illustrious Landon Lecture tradition. Before I introduce the Senator, let me introduce other members of the platform party. Dr. Jim Legg, the President of the Kansas State University Faculty Senate and Head of the Department of Physics. Tim Riemann, Kansas State University Student Body President and a Senior in Agricultural Economics and Pre-Law from Derby, Kansas. Tim? On my right, Edward Seaton, Chairman of the Landon Patrons and the publisher and Editor-in-Chief of the Manhattan Mercury. Ed? Then, next to him, Dr. Charles Reagan, the Chair of the Landon Lectures and my Executive Assistant. Well, this afternoon I'm also honored to introduce several other individuals that are here, and we thank them for coming. And I want to start out with our two Kansas United States Senators. First, U.S. Senator Sam Brownback. And, of course, United States Senator Pat Roberts. And let me remind you, if you've forgotten, they are both K-State graduates. State Representative Kent Glasscock, State Representative Jeff Peterson. We're happy to have them here as well. And then we're delighted to have two regents from the Kansas Board of Regents, Regent Murray Lull, Murray, and Regent Phyllis Nolan. Phyllis? We're also very pleased to have the Major General, Michael Dotson, the Commanding General of Fort Riley, here today, and thank you, General, for coming as well. General? Senator Phil Gramm is beginning his third term in the United States Senate. In 1984, he ran for the United States Senate and won with more votes than any candidate for statewide office had ever achieved in the history of Texas. That's good. Senator Gramm first won election to the House of Representatives as a Democrat, but when the Democratic leadership stripped him of his House Budget Committee seat in retaliation for co-authoring the Reagan economic program, he resigned from Congress. He went home to Texas to run for his seat as a Republican and won re-election in a special election held on Abraham Lincoln's birthday. He was the first Republican elected in the 100-year history of his district. Senator Gramm has been described in the Atlantic Monthly as a man who, quote, carries his own garment bag and does his own thinking. The only other one was maybe Jimmy Carter, carried his own garment bag. That's about it. He has been an outstanding leader in articulating the new conservative economic policy of the United States Senate in the late 1980s and 1990s, and indeed of the United States Congress itself. He is chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee and played a pivotal role in leading the successful effort to restore a Republican majority to the United States Senate. Senator Gramm holds a PhD in economics and has been a professor at Texas A&M University. I have a feeling he's going to the game tomorrow. Senator Gramm is a respected author of numerous books and articles. We're also very pleased that his wife, Dr. Wendy Lee Gramm, is with us today. As you, I know, understand and remember, she is the former chairman of the U.S. Commodities Futures Trading Commission under both Presidents Reagan and Bush. And Wendy, thanks so much for coming today. You are a delight as well. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming the U.S. Senator from the state of Texas, Phil Gramm, to the Landon podium.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. I always feel comfortable at a college lectern. As John mentioned, I taught economics at Texas A&M. I taught for 12 years. I've tried to teach the same subject in Congress for 19 years. You won't be surprised to hear me say that my students at Texas A&M were a lot smarter than the people I'm working with now in Congress. The ultimate measure of a great university is not its faculty, not its library, not its football team, and not its facilities. The ultimate measure of a great university is its graduates. And I know Kansas State University through two of your graduates, your two great United States Senators. And I want to take this opportunity to tell you, in the words of the old Hallmark card commercial, that when you elected Pat Roberts and Sam Brownback, you cared enough to send the very best, and we appreciate it. Pat Roberts has branded his name indelibly on American foreign policy and provided the pivotal leadership in what I hope and believe will dramatically change and hopefully bring to an end 130 years of policy where the federal government was the dominant decision maker in American agriculture. No new member of the Senate in my career has had a bigger impact quicker than Sam Brownback. And I know that you know these two honored sons of your great university, and I know you're proud of them. And they're really your representatives to the nation's capital and to the nation of what Kansas State is all about, and you couldn't be better represented than you are. I never knew Alf Landon, but I did know Nancy Cassabaum. And I think I know a little bit of her dad through her. And so it is a very special privilege for me to be a Landon lecturer, and I have looked forward to this opportunity. John and I have discussed it, giving me a chance to come here and visit your university and be here for tomorrow's football game. I want today to talk about Social Security and Medicare. I want to talk about the threat that they pose to the future of your prosperity and your freedom, and in a very real sense, posing the greatest financial threat that we have ever faced to the future of the country in the history of the Republic. Now, let me outline what I want to try to say, and then I'll say it. I want to first give you the bad news about how real the financial crisis is that we face in Social Security and Medicare, how menacing it is to our future, both our prosperity and our freedom. I want to try to explain to you where the problem came from. And then I want to give you the good news, which is that we can fix it. And then I'd like, trying to deviate from my background as a school teacher, to be brief so that we can have time for some questions. I want to explain to you how I believe we can fix it. In beginning that, I want to begin with an analogy. And I hope as you listen to what I have to say today, and what I have to say I believe is alarming, I want you to think about this analogy. And the analogy is the following. Our problems with Medicare and Social Security are very much akin to the situation you might face if you go to the doctor to get a physical exam, and the doctor looks you over and checks out all vital parts and calls you in and says, I've got some bad news and I have some glorious news. The bad news is you have a debilitating disease that is going to ruin your life. The glorious news is I can cure it. But to cure it, you got to go on this diet. And that basically is the message I want to talk about today. In 1935, when we started Social Security, the average life expectancy in the country was less than 65 years of age. So we were guaranteeing a benefit that the majority of Americans would never get. Today, the average life expectancy is 82 years of age. It is not only a benefit that most Americans will get, but they will get it for a very long time. In 1950, there were 16 workers for every Social Security beneficiary. And we were paying about 2% of twice the average wage in the country as the maximum amount that anybody paid into Social Security. To begin with, the maximum amount anyone paid was $50 in a year. Today, there are 3.9 workers per retiree, and each worker is paying 12.4% of their wage into the Social Security system. In 25 years from today, there will be 2 workers per retiree, and we are looking at between 16 and 18 cents out of every dollar earned by every worker being required to be paid into Social Security to keep the system solvent. That number will rise to about 20 cents out of every dollar over the next 40 years. Medicare started in 1965. For the last 15 years, there's been no program in the federal government that has grown as fast in cost as Medicare. It has averaged 11% growth for 15 years in a row. When we started Medicare, it was funded by paying a tax of 0.7% of the first $6,600 you earned. Today, Medicare takes 2.9 cents out of every dollar earned by every American, and still, with this level of taxing, Medicare will represent a drain on the general treasury of $1.1 trillion in the next 10 years. When we started Medicare, we were in a period where the first baby boomer was entering the labor market in 1965. And as Congress looked at this huge mass of people who had been born from 1946 to 1964, 75 million of them, it looked as if that tidal wave of workers would never end. In fact, had they gone down to the Census Bureau in 1965 and asked, they would have discovered that it already ended. But when we started Medicare, we had this huge influx of new workers. And when we started Medicare, there were 5.5 workers for every beneficiary. There are now 3.9 workers per beneficiary, and we are headed over the next 25 years to 2 workers per beneficiary. The unfunded liability of Social Security, the amount of money that we would have to pay a consortium of retirement funds to take over Social Security, to take the taxes being paid in, and to pay the premiums that we are committed to. If any such consortium existed, we would have to pay them $11 trillion today to absorb the unfunded liability in Social Security. The unfunded liability in Medicare is $2.9 trillion. Together, that is twice the registered value of the national debt of the United States. And in trying to get people to understand it, the problem is I have one constituent who knows what $1 billion is, Ross Perot. I don't know anybody who knows what $1 trillion is, but even in Washington, it is a lot of money. Now, let me explain where the crisis came from. Otto von Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, in fact, he was Chancellor from 1881 to 1890, a brilliant politician, a product of the German Socialist School of Economics, came up with the idea in the 1880s of creating entitlements that would be funded on a pay-as-you-go basis, that would be funded by taxing current workers and paying benefits to people who had already worked, where nominally there would be a claim that people were paying for their own benefits, but in reality, there would be no trust fund, no investment, no power of compound interest creating an asset base to pay for the benefit. Germany in the 1880s had an exploding population. It was becoming a world power, very high birth rates, and the program looked in that period as if it would be successful. It certainly was successful politically. From Germany, our modern Social Security and Medicare spread first to Europe, then to the Americas. Interestingly enough, it didn't come to America first. It came to Chile first in 1925. It was adopted in the United States, Social Security in 1935, Medicare in 1965. It's interesting to note that in Germany today, 20.5 cents out of every dollar earned by every worker goes into their Social Security program. And when you combine their retirement health care program and their Social Security program, it takes roughly 30 cents out of every dollar earned by every worker in Germany. Interestingly enough, that's almost precisely what the estimate is that our two programs will take 40 years from now when these programs are as old in America as they are in Germany. Also, it is important to note that Germany has not created a net new job in 15 years, and it has an unemployment rate of 12%. Now, the pattern of pay-as-you-go financed entitlements is the same the world over, and so I want to talk about it in terms of our experience in the United States. There are three major problems with it. Number one, pay-as-you-go financing has no trust fund. And as a result, it benefits not at all from the most powerful economic force in history, and that's the power of compound interest. While nominally we have told the American people since 1935 that we have a trust fund, the trust fund is an accounting entry. There's no investment. It creates no jobs. It generates no wealth growth. The trust fund is the debt of the federal government. It is not carried on the books of the Treasury as being a debt of the government. The payment of interest is not carried as an outlay of the federal Treasury. There is no trust fund. Secondly, life expectancy as part of the good news has exploded worldwide and in the United States, as I mentioned, growing from less than 65 when Social Security came into effect in 1935 to roughly 82 today. And finally, and most menacingly, there is a dramatic change in the population makeup of the whole Western world and particularly in the United States of America. And that population makeup is being affected dramatically by what we call the baby boom. When Social Security started in 1935, the birth rate was at a historic low. But beginning in 1935, the birth rate started to rise. It had a spike during World War II, but Americans came home from winning World War II with great confidence in the future. And beginning in 1946, there was an explosion in the birth rate in America. 76 million babies were born between 1946 and 1964. That baby boomer generation made it possible for us to fund Social Security and to greatly increase benefits in the 1940s and 1950s. It made it possible for us to start Medicare at a fairly nominal tax rate and to provide benefits such as the world has never seen before. The baby boomer generation, in short, made possible the two most loved and most important programs of the federal government. And the baby boom generation, unless we reform Medicare and Social Security dramatically, will destroy both of those programs. Because we are now 14 years away from the first baby boomer retiring. And it is a double-edged sword. It's fewer people working, and it is more people drawing benefits. Let me just give you one figure, and I could numb your mind with them, but I'll just give you one good one. The babies that are retiring this year were born in 1932. And 1932, at that point, was a historic low in the birth rate in the country. This should be a period where Medicare and Social Security are flush. Only 200,000 people will turn 65 this year. 14 years from today, 1.6 million people will turn 65, and that number will not change for 20 years. The birth rate by 1970 was half the birth rate in 1935. And there is no sign on the horizon that we are about to have an increase in the birth rate, and even if we did, we're 22 years away from that increase in the birth rate affecting the labor force. Now let me summarize the crisis. If you assume that the American economy grows as fast for the next 25 years as it is growing today, and that's a heroic assumption. If you assume that the level of immigration, both legal and illegal, stays as high as it is today, a record level, something Congress shows every evidence of changing. And if you assume that both the economy grows as fast for 25 years as it is growing today, and that the level of immigration stays at record highs, we will still in 25 years have to have a payroll tax twice as high as the payroll tax is today. In other words, up from 15%, 30%, to fund Medicare and Social Security. And what that will mean is, as incredible as this sounds, average income American families making between $39,000 and $49,000 will have marginal tax rates of between 57 and 60%. Now, if you assume that having a marginal tax rate for average families of 60% will have an impact on the willingness of people to work, if you assume that a 30% payroll tax will have an impact on the demand for labor, we could easily be in a situation where the payroll tax would have to triple in order to fund Medicare and Social Security under a more pessimistic scenario, and that would mean a marginal tax rate of 73%. And we're not talking about rich people. We're talking about family of four, $39,000. That's the problem. So what is the good news? Well, there's a lot of good news. First of all, we can fix it. And not only can we fix it, we can make it better than it ever was. How? Well, first of all, the first bit of good news is if the average American worker, 22 years of age, could put 1% of their wages into a private investment through a mandatory program, and if that investment would grow at 4% a year, which is half of the rate of growth in the value of Standard & Poor's 500 over the last 70 years on average, they could fully fund their health care retirement benefits. Now they're paying 2.9% of their income. They're paying roughly 3 times the amount they would have to pay if they could simply make investments to fund their own retirement. That's the first piece of good news. The second piece of good news is that at a very modest interest rate, very modest rate of return on investment, 4%, that the average 42-year-old in America could transfer from Medicare to a program where by putting 2.9% of their wages into a real investment fund where the government regulated on safety and soundness, they could fully fund their own health care retirement, paying only the amount they're currently paying for Medicare. And yet, as startling as those numbers are, it is an absolute certainty that no 22-year-old under the current program will get anything like the benefits that current retirees are getting, and virtually no 49-year-old will either. I'm not proposing a transition path. There are a lot of ways to get out of the old system and into the new one, but I'll simply give you some numbers that on their face are pretty shocking, but when you think about it, they're not that shocking. If we let everybody 42 years old or younger convert over to a system where Medicare benefits were based on investment, I call it investment-based Medicare, investment-based Social Security. The federal government would regulate the investments on safety and soundness. You'd have to have a broad portfolio. The companies that sold the investments would be very strictly regulated for safety and soundness. If we let everybody 42 years of age and younger convert from the current system to an investment-funded system, so their benefits would be forever guaranteed, and it would be independent of the population distribution. If you let each cohort, that is, each person 42 years of age, if their investments were pooled to pay for the benefits for everybody 42 years old, and the 22-year-olds, everybody 22 years old would have their health care insured by these private investments. And you had people who were 42 put the whole 2.9% they're now paying in Medicare taxes into an investment-based Medicare system. And then younger people would put the amount needed to fund the program, a real program, into their real program, and then the difference between 2.9% and what they're paying now would go to help pay benefits to people who are already in the system. You would have an unfunded liability of $734 billion in Medicare. You could borrow that money and pay it off over 50 years in annual installments of $31 billion. In other words, this is simply one path of transition that could forever get us out of a bankrupt system that would avoid in the process an ultimate payroll tax of roughly 14% to pay for Medicare by making the transition to an investment-based system if we did it now. If you wait, the cost explode, because the sooner you get people into an investment-based system, the more you unleash the most powerful economic force in history, which is the power of compound interest. Throughout history, very few people have ever had the ability to put wealth to work. We would let every worker put wealth to work to pay for their retirement and to pay for their Medicare. Now, on Social Security, the good news is that at the rate of return that we have gotten on average over the last 70 years in Standard & Poor's 500, you could pay for your same benefit that you're getting under Medicare with a 2% of salary investment. In other words, workers today, young workers, let's say someone who graduates from Kansas State University this year, will next year pay 12.4 cents out of every dollar they make into Social Security. If they could put 2% of every dollar they made into a real investment, it would pay for retirement benefits equal to what is currently being given to people on Medicare, but greatly in excess of anything under the current system that you could ever hope to draw. Because by the time that you retire, the baby boomers will have all retired, and we'll have 2 workers per retiree. Martin Feldstein at Harvard has worked out a plan where if for 15 years we raise the payroll tax on Social Security from 12.4% to 14.9%, and we had young workers put 5% into a real investment, the rest of the money going to pay off existing debt in Social Security, in 15 years, we would have the payroll tax down below the level that exists today. In 40 years, we would have it down to 5%, and the entire system would be converted over to an investment-funded system. How is it that we could pay for Medicare with a 1% investment instead of a 2.9%, and Social Security for a 2% investment rather than a 12.4% investment, and that it could be guaranteed? The difference is the power of compound interest, the power of putting capital to work, the power of making every working American a wealth owner. Finally, on this point, let me point out how unfair Social Security is in one sense. I often get asked as I've been talking to people, this is the first time I've ever spoken on this subject, but in talking to people about it, I'm often asked, well, what about poor people? The current system is very unfair to poor people. First of all, the money you put into Social Security doesn't even count toward your retirement until you're 30 years of age, because it's only based on 35 years of your highest wages. So if you graduate from K-State and you go to law school, and then you go on and get an advanced degree in law and you go to work when you're 28 years old, it's not bad. But if you went to work when you were 16 years old as a blue-collar worker, from 16 to 30, you paid Social Security taxes you got absolutely nothing from. Social Security is one of the few programs in America that transfers money from poor people to rich people, because poor people start working sooner and don't live as long. One of the powers of investment-financed Social Security is that people that start working at 16, that money is going to compound with the power of compound interest all those years until they turn 65. I'm not talking about something that has never happened before. It happened in Chile. It has now happened in Australia. It is now being done in England. It is being done in Argentina. Even Mexico is beginning to look at investment-based Social Security. Let me explain very briefly how the Chilean experience worked. Chile started Social Security in 1925, 10 years before we did. By 1950, they had 10 workers per retiree. By 1980, they had 2 workers per retiree. They had reached the point where over 20 cents out of every dollar for every worker was going into their Social Security system, and that was funding about 60% of the cost. The other 40% was being borne by general tax revenue. They were on the verge of an economic collapse. Under the guidance, basically, of a group of economists from the University of Chicago, they redid their system. They gave people a choice. You could stay in the old system, or you could convert to a new system. And here's how the new system would work. Let's say you're 40 years old, and let's say you paid $40,000 into Social Security. If you stay in Social Security, you stay under the existing Social Security program. But if you get out, they give you a government bond that's what's called a deep discount bond, has a face value of $60,000, and then it has a buildup of internal interest that it will pay you. They guarantee 4% real interest, and they pay it to you the day you turn 65 years of age. Then they took 15% of every dollar of earnings had to be paid in. 10% went into private investments for an investment-based system. People in Chile chose initially but among 12 companies that provided investment funds. They now have 20. They have averaged a rate of return on investment of 9% since 1980. And they have literally turned Marx on his head, because in Chile, a house painter or a taxi cab driver will have $70,000 or $80,000 of real wealth that belongs to them. Their program has been so successful that they can't invest the money in Chile because they've inflated the stock values of a very small company, and they're now the largest investor in South America. Their program is so successful that they now let people decide when they retire. So you have to put 10%, but you're allowed to put as much as 20%, and anytime you can equal 50% of your last 10 years of earnings in retirement, you can retire. So it is very common for people to say, well, I'd like to retire at 58. Each month they get a printout of where they are on their investment, and by simply changing what they're putting in, they're able to change their retirement age. Now, those are basically the two options. And I've tried to come up with sort of an analogy of where we are, and I came up with a strange one. And it's the Christmas Carol. You all remember Ebenezer Scrooge, probably the most maligned person in literature, because in reality, Scrooge at the end is a wonderful person. We all remember him for what he was in the beginning, but the two things I want to call your attention to and then make this quote are, if you'll remember, when the ghost of Christmas's present comes and is carrying Scrooge around, and he goes to Bob. I always screw these names up. Wendy always yells at me. I think it's Bob Cratchit. Is that right, Wendy? They go to Bob Cratchit's house, and poor Tiny Tim is there, and so Scrooge, who's already being transformed by what he's seeing, says to this ghost of Christmas present, is Tiny Tim going to live? And the ghost of Christmas present says, if things continue as they are, he will die. And then, as you remember, as you got into this Christmas future, who's a very unhappy guy, and Scrooge is going, he's about to read his own gravestone, and he gives a quote that really says where we are with the future of our country. He says, men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if the course be departed from, the ends will change. And as we all know from that story, he changed. He changed the course of lives. Tiny Tim lived. Now, I've been talking to John today about the future of America. There's no reason that we should not be the dominant country in the world in the 21st century. The competition in the 21st century is our kind of competition. It's not who will stand the longest on an assembly line, bored to death. It's not who can punch the most punches out or sew the largest number of shirts. It's who can think, who can innovate, who can come up with new ideas, and who can transform those ideas into reality. That's something we do better than anybody else in the world. And that's what the competition is going to be about in the 21st century. We can dominate the 21st century. Americans can be richer, freer, and happier than we have ever been. But we cannot dominate the 21st century if the average tax rate of families of four earning $39,000 a year is 58%. In reality, the crisis I'm talking about threatens a very bright future. If we continue to do nothing, I'm not talking about making up predictions about the future. I'm not trying to sound like the guy who's predicted 12 of the last 2 recessions. I'm talking about the cold facts with the population makeup of the country, that if we continue Medicare and Social Security as they are, 2 things are going to happen. And it is certain they're going to happen. Number one, taxes are going to explode. Today, we're having debates about cutting taxes, when in reality, we know 25 years from now, the tax rate will be double what it is today to pay for Medicare and Social Security unless we change it. The question is, do we have the will to change it? I think we know how to do it. Clearly, there are going to be those voices who say, well, there's no problem, just leave it alone. It will be a question of American leadership. It'll be a question of the ability of the American people to ferret out the truth and to understand it. It is going to be a very important debate. And I wanted to talk about this subject for the first time here at Kansas State in front of young people because it is your future we're talking about. Those people who are over 50 are going to be affected by this mostly through their children. I have 2 sons, one 24 and one 22. I have a big stake in the future of this debate. My sons will not have the opportunity that I've had unless we deal with this problem. And so the bad news is we have a debilitating disease that will ruin our country and spoil the most promising future that America has ever had. The good news is we know how to solve the problem. And when we're debating Medicare and Social Security, we've got to stop talking about the impact of it just on my mother and your mother. We have got to start talking about it as an impact on our mothers, our fathers, and our children as well. Thank you very much.
Just superb. Senator, thank you for that brilliant lecture on the American economy and especially some of the problems we're facing with Medicare and Social Security in the next generation. Now we will open it up to questions, and as you know, we have microphones on your left and on your right. So if you would proceed up to the mic, I think we already have one person over here.
Yes, sir.
Senator Gramm, the investment-based Medicare and Social Security assumes continued growth in the stock market today. These growths have been seen through investment of the baby boomers, and someday, well, 22 years from now, they're all going to start retiring and pulling their money out of these investments. Now, at that point, I can't see how the stock market will continue to grow. It seems to me that it must shrink, and I think that our stock values and the stock market in general right now is inflated like you've suggested that Chile's is. How do you suggest that these policies will, sorry, very nervous.
Well, first of all, let me say that no one knows what the rate of return on investment is going to be next year, much less 25 or 50 years from now. But what we do know is the past. And as is inscribed on the National Archives, what is past is prologue. And we know that even if you leave out the last 10 years, if you say that was an aberration, and last year, the average white-collar worker in America saw their retirement funds grow faster than their income. I don't know that that has ever happened before. For the first time ever now, financial assets are the largest assets of the average working family, more than our homes. Nothing like that has ever happened before. Leave all that 10 years out. Still, from 1926 until 1987, when you adjust for the taxes that were paid, investment in American equities have yielded about 9% a year in real return, up and down. So if you're talking about long-term investments, that's probably the soundest long-term investment you can make. And if the value of American investment collapses, government's not going to be able to pay the benefits anyway. So basically what I'm saying is this, and my proposal, which I'm still working on, I didn't have enough time to get in detail, is to basically say this. Each worker is required to put a certain amount into their retirement account each year under strict supervision for safety and soundness. And if they're out of work or if their wages are low or whatever their circumstance is, at the end of their working lives, if they can't equal a certain level, which I would set at the current level of Medicare, then we fill up the glass the rest of the way. That's what Chile does. They have had very few glasses to fill up because of the rapid economic growth that they have had. So we can guarantee it. You're incurring some social risk in doing it, but I simply ask you to remember that, and there are always people who are going to say, well, the economy could go to hell. It's true. But if it does, our ability to collect taxes also collapses. And Germany's problem today with a 30% payroll tax and a 12% unemployment rate and moving toward a situation where 1 out of every 3 people is over 60 years of age is that their economy is not generating the revenues that will allow them to pay the benefits. So I think our record is good on yielding rate of return. If that's not a secure, if savings is not the securest way to fund retirement, then there isn't a secure way. You can't eliminate risk.
Hello, Senator. You've really tried to paint yourself here as a hero of the working classes, but I'd like you to comment on something that you didn't. According to an Atlantic Monthly article from a while back, more than 50% of all the Social Security entitlements paid out by the government go to households with annual incomes greater than $50,000. So what I'm saying is, when are we going to wake up and realize that the filthy rich in this country have a responsibility to help support the people they've exploited in order to gain their wealth? And wouldn't an alternative solution to this impending Social Security crisis be to stop giving handouts to people like you that don't look like they're missing any meals?
Well, let me say, I hope you're not an economics major. If you are, somebody's doing a very poor job. Let me respond to the serious parts of the question. I am missing a meal because I'm on a diet. But let me respond to the serious part of the question. First of all, we already tax Social Security benefits for high-income individuals. I have proposed, and I support, breaking all entitlements into 2 categories: earned benefits and unearned benefits. And you would have completely different rules for the 2. For any earned benefit where you've paid in and you're owed it, you get it, no matter what your income is. But for unearned benefits, you don't get those if you don't meet an income test of being needy. Part of the problem, however, is that people have a greatly distorted view of what they paid in. In 1983, when Social Security was broke, and we were debating how we were going to change the system, my mother called me up all in a huff and said that she wanted us to calculate how much she had paid in over her lifetime and give her that money and just go to hell. And so I called up the Social Security Administration. I gave them my mother's name and Social Security number, and I got them to print out how much she had paid in. And my mother did pay the maximum from the beginning of the program, but it was $50 a year. As it turns out, my mother draws out more in 11 months than she and her employer ever put into the system. Now, you can imagine what her response to that was. We were stealing her money, and we were falsifying the records. But the point is, and I think the good news here is we can do better for working people than we're doing now by building retirement on savings rather than debt. Debt makes you poorer every day. Investment and capital makes you richer every day. And the solution for wealth is not to try to tear it down, but to be sure everybody gets a chance to have part of it. And what I love about the idea of investment-based retirement is it's Marx turned on his head. Marx's idea was that the people were going to own all the capital, which meant the government, which meant nobody. But when I own my retirement, or a better example, because I'm not a good example, but a better example, when a house painter owns his own retirement, when every month he gets a report that says that he's got so many tens of thousands of dollars that belong to him, and if he dies, his children, his wife, get that money. And if he lives, he can invest it to pay his own retirement, and he never has to worry about what some politician might do or might not do. You know, the Supreme Court has ruled that under Social Security, you don't own anything other than what Congress says you own. We can change all that. So if I were a young revolutionary, I would be for what I'm talking about, and I would denounce the current system. Yeah. Yes, ma'am. And I'll try to be briefer. It's Friday, and I used to lecture for an hour and 15 minutes on Friday. Yes, ma'am.
I have a very wise mother-in-law and mom and dad, and they are 83, 85, and 86 years old. My mother-in-law lives in a retirement community. She is very distressed because of the messages that were put out by the Democratic political advertisement pre the last election. The folks that live in the retirement community she is in believed them. She couldn't even discuss at lunch what she thought because it was so unpopular. She was positive, or they were positive, that they would, that all those things that the Clinton ad said, they believed them. And somehow that has to be turned around because it's not true.
Well, let me respond in a totally nonpartisan way. Don't ever believe anything a Democrat says. But having said that, you know, the Bible says ye shall be known by your deeds. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to understand, if we're going to fix Medicare and Social Security, we're going to be subject to all kinds of criticism in trying to do it. Under what I'm proposing, everybody would get, that's already in the system, that's past 50 or that's retired, we would work it out so that they would get every dime that they would get under the current system, and probably more because the current system can't be funded. But all I'm saying is let the people 50 and under begin to make real investments so that they get something. And it is going to be hard. It is going to be subject to all kind of political demagoguery, but I believe that Americans sense that this is not going to work, that there is a very real problem here. And I believe that if we tell people the truth, and if we have bold ideas, and we're willing to debate them, we don't run off from them, that people will understand, and that they will know the truth, and they're already free, it'll keep them that way. Yes, sir.
Yes, Senator Gramm, realizing that you were once a Democrat who has since repented, I also, I respect your opinion tremendously, and I respect this program that you're proposing. Realistically, knowing that the cost of waiting is very high for waiting on the Social Security and Medicare conversion over to an investment base, how long before this could be implemented?
Well, that's something that I've looked at. I think we've got 4 or 5 years where you could do this and you could have a smooth transition, and where you would not have to have a dramatic increase in taxes and you wouldn't have to cut benefits. What I'm talking about today in some form is going to be done because there's no real alternative to it. The question is, are we going to do it early enough so that we can have an orderly transition, or are we really going to have to hurt people by taking away benefits? Germany this year announced a cut of about 15% across the board in all their retirement benefits. And they're going to have to do that over and over and over again. And basically what I'm saying is that if we will do it now, we're 14 years away from the first baby boomer retiring. If we let the first baby boomer retire before we address this problem, it can't be fixed without putting America through a gut-wrenching political experience. Because if we wait 14 years, we can't pay the benefits, we can't raise the taxes high enough to pay them, and so we're going to end up doing some of both, and we're going to hurt everybody. If we started the transition now, we could make it work, and I believe that Americans, if you explain to them that we're talking about a 15-year transition period, even if during that transition period they had to pay more to get a real retirement program and to basically guarantee the future of their children, I believe people would do it. So it's going to happen in some form. The question is, are we going to do it earlier enough that we can guarantee my 83-year-old mother that her benefits will be totally untouched by it? Or are we going to wait, in which case we're going to end up having to do what the countries in the world that waited have had to do? Chile has, in 17 years, completely converted over 95% of their workers have opted for the new retirement program. No young people are going into the old retirement program. And in another 15 years, they'll be completely out of the old retirement program, and they will have a wealth-generating machine. That's what I want to see us have. Yes, ma'am.
Senator Gramm, the debate between Social Security and private investment seems to always focus on retirement benefits, but Social Security is much more than that. It's also an insurance policy against disability and death. In fact, approximately one-third of the young people entering the workforce today will either die or become disabled before they ever get to retirement age. How would this program take care of those people who aren't lucky enough to save till they're 62 or 65?
Okay. How the program would work is as follows. Part of the money would go to a premium to pay for disability. Part of the money, one of the advantages of the current system, of the investment-based system, because again, it's based on private investments, but under government regulation for safety and soundness. The Social Security Administration would collect the money and provide the accounting function of sending the money to the investment fund that qualified. They would regulate those retirement funds for safety and soundness. But one of the advantages of an investment-based system is that if a working person dies, they get a $500 death benefit. If you've got an investment-based system and you live to be 60 and you die, your heirs are going to get several $100,000 of assets because you're leaving real wealth. So Medicare and Social Security are the two most loved and two best programs of the government. I'm talking about making them sustainable by building them on real investment rather than debt. And we can do it, and the SIP program can work better. Now, I didn't make any argument today, which I could have made, that an investment-based program will return 7 times the rate of return of a debt-based program. I'm not going to try to sell this on you're going to get more. I think you got to sell it on safety and soundness. Would you rather have your retirement based on real investment that you own or based on the goodwill of some politician? If you don't know the answer to that, you better get to know politicians better.
Okay, we've got time for two more.
One from each side.
Good afternoon, Senator. My question is, I am not an economics major. I hated economics. I took it because I had to take it. But what I'm asking is, if everything I've paid into Social Security since the age of 16 when I started working, where did all my money go? Did it go to pay for other beneficiaries, or? I always wondered where it went. And if we go to this investment-based system, will that automatically go towards, you know, my son when he starts working? Would it go towards him, or would it go towards someone else again?
Okay. Currently, about 97 cents out of every dollar you send Social Security goes to my mother. In other words, about 97 cents out of every dollar goes directly to pay benefits somebody else. About 3% goes to the Treasury, which in essence spends it on something else. No investment is made. Now, the beauty of the system that I'm talking about is the money during the transition, we're going to have to pay the people that have already retired about to retire. We can't walk off and leave that debt, and it's $11 trillion. That's a lot of money. But that's there. No matter what we do, it's like having a debt. No matter how you carry it on your books, it's still there. The advantage of the system that I'm talking about is that most of the money you pay in under an investment-based system will go into investments that you will own. Once a month, you'll get a printout that will say how much you've paid in, how much you've earned, and how much your retirement is worth, and at the current growth rate of your account, how much it's going to be worth the day you turn 65. And it will belong to you. You'll have a property right in it. Nobody can take it away from you. That's the difference in the two systems. Now, I want to be perfectly honest. I want to be sure people understand. Everybody currently working is going to have to pay off this debt in Social Security and Medicare. And that's the transition cost we're going to have to pay to get out of the current system into the new system, but we're going to have to pay it anyway, only we won't have a new system if we just sit around and do nothing. And my view is, if you're going to have to pay off the old debt, at least don't keep piling it up.
Thank you, Senator.
Yes, sir. Last question.
Senator, you've made allusion to the fact that this entire program is very susceptible to demagoguery, and anyone who tries to tackle this, I think, is going to get mugged politically. Do you see anyone out there on the horizon who's got the political courage to try to take this on?
Yeah, me. No, let me respond that I'm at a point in my career where I can do this. And if I can't do it, nobody can. And if you give Americans a problem and you don't give them a solution, you immobilize people. But if you can come up with a solution, I believe people are willing to respond to it. And let me tell you how I see this debate evolving. You'll get people who have a vested interest in the status quo who will demagogue the thing to death. They will frighten older people. We will have to convince them that we're going to pay the benefits that they would get under the current system. And so they don't have a dog in this fight. We have then got to convince younger workers that they got a very big dog in this fight and their dog could get killed. And that really, this is a reform for young people. That this is a debate really about people who are 35 years old and younger. That their future is jeopardized by the current system. We love the current system. We love the benefits of it. We don't want to give them up. But we can't pay them based on debt. But we can. The glorious news is we can pay them and more based on wealth. And that, I think, is what the debate is about. When we started the program in 1935, we should have done it right. But we were so eager to start paying benefits, which was the political reward, that we didn't build up the investment before we started paying the benefits. We should have, in retrospect. But we didn't. Now we got to go back and fix it, and it means a sort of a one-time paying off of old debt that has built up over the years. But the point is, it's got to be done. And we can pay it off and have a new system that works, or we can end up paying the cost and having the same system that doesn't work. So I think it is going to be an important debate. This is maybe the first time you've really heard this discussed in any detail. You're going to hear it at great lengths. Medicare is in deep trouble in 4 or 5 years. Medicare is going to be on its back. It's destined to become the most expensive program in the history of the government. And we're going to have to begin to make some dramatic changes. So we can either put wealth to work paying for our retirement health care, or we can have retirement health care that is shoddy and where health care is rationed by the government. And that's really the choice. And I would rather my children build up their own wealth to pay for their own retirement and their own health care and have them to make the decision rather than to have Washington make it. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much, Senator.